data with from the array, and I'm going to be putting it inside the table view. I'm going to be taking data from the text field, putting it inside the table view. I need to be able to reference both things in code. So I'm going to create two IB outlets. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go to my array. I'm going to open up my array view controller in the assistant panel. Remember, you click option and you click, and it automatically opens in the second view controller in the second screen. Inside here, I'm going to make these outlets by control-click dragging. So my first outlet is for my text field, so I'm just going to call it field. The second one is for my table view, so I'm going to call this table view. Okay, great. We now have these two outlets for these two user interface elements. Next, let's see what the instructions say. Add a table view and a text input box to this view controller. Okay, done. Accept keyboard input from the text field. Alright, so that's the next step. So, to accept keyboard input, well, it already does accept keyboard input, but we need to save it. So, So, this is the issue where size classes come into play. This is why I always change to, what's it called in regular? Compact and regular. So, zooming in here, I'm going to change it over here. So it looks like a straight line on the first column. I'm just going to move it a little so it fits. Great. I'm going to run it again. Better, but not the best. So I'm going to contract it a little bit. Try again. Okay, great. So, in here, if I click on the text field, text keyboard pops up, I can start typing. So we need to capture the value that we typed when the user pushes the return key. So this is where delegates come in handy. So in array view controller, we are going to add a delegate after the UI view controller. We're going to call a certain delegate. Remember, array view controller right here is the name of this class. It is inheriting from the UI view controller class. So anything I write after it is a protocol. So the protocol we're going to use is UI text field delegate. So remember when we played around with country delegate, we knew that because it was called country delegate, it was coming from a class called country, and it's a protocol. So UI text field delegate is the same thing. It is a protocol that exists on the UI text field class. So UI text field delegate has a bunch of methods. So I'm going to click through it right now, and as you can see, these are all optional, which we didn't go over. The meaning is because they're optional, you don't actually have to implement them. But because we have to perform a certain task, these delegate methods will help us perform this task. So these delegate methods are hit and entered whenever you type text, whenever you push enter, whenever, what else is there? Whenever you finish editing, whenever you start editing, and so on. So the ones we care about here is text field should return, because when we return, we want to save the value. And that's it, I think, right? Yeah, that's the only one we care about. So we're only going to use this specific delegate method. So the way I found it is I literally highlighted the word command, so I have this thumb, and I clicked on it, and it took me directly to where it's defined. So that's why I knew what exists on the class. You could as easily just Google UI text field delegate methods and find the list on Apple's website. So, because this conforms to UI text field delegate, I now have access to a bunch of text field messages. The one I'm interested in is text field should return. Why? Because when you push the return button, something happens. So one of the first things that's going to happen is I want to dismiss the keyboard. I can't remember how.
Do self.view
editing. Yep, thank you. So to dismiss the keyboard, you do self.view.endEditing and you pass true. What endEditing does is, what calling endEditing on the view does is it calls every subview in here. So it'll call the table view and the text field, and if they respond to the endEditing method, it will call whichever one of them is currently active, also known as the first responder. it will call it and tell it to drop the keyboard. So let's do that. I have to return true because
So this method asks if the program should listen to the return key being hit. If you, for some weird reason, it's very unlikely, would want to ignore the return key being hit, you can return false here. But in most cases, you're going to return true here.
okay. So we're going to run this and it's not going to work. The reason being is because I haven't told this text field, I haven't set up the delegate for the text field. So it doesn't know that array view controller is the delegate. So UI text field here, I'm going to write it out in our viewDidLoad method. Right here, I'm going to write text field, or I called it field rather, field.delegate equals self. Okay, so in this example, if we take an analogy to our country, field is our country, delegate is the text field delegate, and self is Devin or Luke. Those are the ambassadors. So self means array view controller. Array view controller is the delegate for field. So whenever field calls a certain method, it's going whenever field tells its delegate to do something, it's going to call it on this class because the delegate is self. So because I have defined the text field should return method, if the return button is ever hit on this class, so inside of interface builder, this method is going to be empty. And we'll know because the keyboard will drop down.
Where is delegate declared as a property?
It's declared on UI text field.
Okay.
So UI text field is like country in this example.
You can click in and you can see that too. So if you
So if you scroll down,
so much stuff in here.
it's right here. Okay? So we now have a delegate. So what we need to do with that delegate is capture whatever we enter into an array. So
Again, programming, start with a println if it comes down to it. Break it down into very small steps.
exactly. So let's say that we need to, I'm going to comment this out for the moment because it's bothering me that it's colored. So, all right, so we have our delegate. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to be able to capture everything we ever enter into an array. So we need to persist an array on this class. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a new variable, a new instance variable, or new property. We're going to call it, I don't know, string array, or just array. And it's going to, if we look at the instructions, into an array of strings. So our array is going to be an array of strings. So I'm going to just create an array of strings. Actually, I can initialize it right away, like this so. So great. We now have a new variable that's called an array. It will only take strings, and it's mutable because it's a variable, not a len. It's a var, which means I can continuously add to it. So what I want to do is, every time this method is entered, this text field should return method is entered, that means the person has finished typing text, right? Because they hit the return button. So because that's the case, this is the point in which I want to drop the keyboard so I can regain access to my view, and it's also the point where I want to store whatever's in the text field inside of here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call array.append field self.field.text. And then I'm going to just print out the array. So you can see what is in the array each time the return button is hit. So I'm going to run this code right now. So because this is the first time I'm running, whatever I type in for the first time, I'm going to type in test, and push return. You'll see that our array, remember an array is just these two not parentheses, brackets, is the word text. Now I'm going to write another word. I'm going to write Luke, for instance, and it's going to say comma Luke the second time around. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to backspace all of this and type Luke. When I click return, you'll see that it now says text test MLE. So I've now achieved 2 to 1. I have connected a text field, a table view, and every time I click the return button, the keyboard drops and I append or I add into the array the value that was in the text field. Are there questions? Is it anyone? Yes.
Can you scroll up to the top?
Here?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions about what's written so far? Not the comments, just what's colored in here. No? Okay.
Yeah, mine is
Did you set up a delegate?
yeah.
In Doodly Load?
Yeah.
Yes. Beneath it, right? So let me see. Okay. So you have to top the keyboard. So push Command K and click and return. I usually do. Okay, so it's not
You have to type with the keyboard?
no, you don't have to set type of keyboard. See this? Where does this function help?
I'm having the same issue here.
I think you may have. Yeah, I think it might be inside of the load method. Check to see if it's that function within Doodly Load.
What?
Is that function within Doodly Load? It sounds kind of funny. So, okay, so is that function out of separate? I'm surprised at that. Yeah. Okay. Now, yes. Cool. So you got it. Let me open it here. So, you hold this open.
So wait, is this function within a function? Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's what happened. Okay, so yours should work. You said delegate. This is connected, right?
Alright, let me show what's wrong, guys. So the project start file we got is apparently messed up. So if you go down this line, follow my cursor, and look. Oh wait. So it's not the project file. So this bracket should close before you have your text field should return. So don't do this, right? I mean, it will work. It won't.
Okay. You didn't put a vanilla mistake in it. That's why you're not doing it.
So make sure you don't have this
You didn't put a vanilla mistake. That's why it's not.
for some reason that it's not inside here. Make sure it's outside of feed.load.
Okay, so A is your mistake.
Anyone else that it's not printing?
Is you need to put equals because that means set the sequence versus looking for a string array.
Good.
Equal means you're looking for it and
Oh,
This class a UI table view delegate and a data source. Okay, so anyone have an idea on how to do that? Okay, so one thing we haven't talked about is that one class can be a delegate to many other classes. So in this case, right now we have UI text field delegate, meaning that because we have a text field, the field does something. The delegate of that text field, this class, that's the delegate, is going to respond to that through the functions, through those functions that we spoke about earlier. Now the table view also has a delegate and a data source. That's how the table view is built. So the table view will also do certain things, and when it scrolls or when you click on it, it's going to perform certain actions, including setting itself up, like adding initial number of sections, initial number of rows, and so on. So to get those methods, because we don't get them by default unless we make a UI table view controller, which we're not doing here. We're using a UI view controller. What we do is we just add a comma and type in UI table view delegate and UI table view data source. So again, we can click right into them, and we see that for UI table view delegate, all the methods are optional. Every single one of them. Usually the ones that aren't optional are all the way at the top, because the first one says it's optional. I can safely assume the rest are optional without actually scrolling through all of them. So we're not going to worry about the delegate methods for the time being. For the data source, however, there are two methods that we need to implement. We need to implement table view number of rows in section, and table view self row index path. So, how do we do this? So first I'm going to stop executing that code, and what I'm going to do is, I know I have a table view already. I've already got it from my storyboard. So my table view has a delegate property, and because I'm doing everything inside of array view controller, that means anything that the table view does, when it scrolls, when I click on it, and so on, the delegate is going to be called, and that delegate is array view controller. Okay? Even though I'm not implementing any array view controller methods, in case I do it in the future, I am declaring self ahead of time. Now, table view also has another delegate method called data source. It's also self. The data source is where you define what the cell looks like and how many rows you're going to have. Now, another point. We have always called everything a delegate. You don't have to call it a delegate. There's only, because the UI table view has two protocols, they call one of them a delegate and one of them a data source. You can call it whatever you want, but by default and by convention, the first time you use a protocol in your class, or the first protocol in your class, if you only have one, should be called delegate. Cool? Alright, so this is an exception that I'm teaching by example. Alright, next, it's still complaining. Why is it complaining? First, it's complaining because it does not conform to table view data source. What this means is I have not yet implemented the two methods. The two methods are numbers of rows in section and self-row index path. So I'm going to scroll down. Whoops, I'm going to scroll down, and below this text field, should return method. I'm going to make a new one called table view self for row. I'll do the other one first. Number of rows in section.
Also, because we said we would conform to those two things, we now get this whole list from Apple with all the methods. You wouldn't get this if you don't get this if you start typing table view, because you didn't conform to those.
Yeah, and to conform to the delegate and the data source, you have to type it in here. So if I were to get rid of these two, I'm not going to do it now, but if I were to get rid of these two things, when I type in table view, none of that would have appeared. Or auto-completed. Or as Tomas says, code hinting. So this is a table view method. It takes in so the delegate calls this method. The delegate passes itself because the table view calls this specific delegate method when it tries to build itself. When it tries to see how many rows it should put inside of it. So it passes itself and a number and the section. So it says, hey, I'm trying to build section 0, which is the first section. How many rows should I have? Because we are not defining how many sections we have, it defaults to 1. So there's the 0th section. So all I'm going to do here is I'm going to return the number of rows there are. So because this returns an int, I know that it's what it's looking for. It's looking for integer. So when I return this number, it's going to tell the table view, this is how many rows I want. So because the number of rows we want is dynamic, if you remember the example we did a week ago or so, we just pass in the array and we write .count afterwards. So our array .count. What this does is it says, hey, I want as many rows as I have data inside of here. Okay? That's step 1. Step 2 is our self-row at index path method. So I'm going to type in table view and scroll up until I get the self-row at index path. So what I'm going to do here is I need to register a cell first. So remember we had these identifiers for cells. They tell you that you're going to be using a certain cell and to make that cell reusable. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to make a new cell identifier. I'm going to call it cell ID, and I'm going to give it it's going to be a string that's also going to be called cell ID. Here I'm going to say table view register cell class, and remember we're going to be using the basic cell class, and I apologize if I'm going fast. I want to get this in here so you can look at it when you do part 2 at home. .self, and I'll stick around afterwards if anyone wants me to go over it again and do it over, because it's almost 9:30. So table view register class, UI table view.self. So this is the type of class that I'm registering, and the identifier is cell ID. Okay, so now in here, I need to make a new table view cell. So I'm going to say let cell equals UI table view cell style. I'm going to see what kind of styles I can. So remember, Tomas has this great hint that when it's highlighted, you push enter.
Also, shouldn't you do
DQ. Sorry, yeah. So I apologize.
on your table do that fast and long?
Yeah. So I apologize. Taking a step back, because we're using reusable cells, which is the way you create cells on a table, that's like the proper way of doing it. Instead of creating a new cell, instead of doing what I was about to do, UI table view cell with the parentheses, I call a table view .dq reusable cell with identifier. What that does is it checks to see if a cell already exists, that if a cell exists for a certain row, and if it doesn't, it creates it up until the entire screen is populated with a unique cell. Now, if any of those cells disappear because it scrolls off the screen, either up or down, the new space that appears when you scroll either up or down uses the old cell's template but populates it with new data. So, if a cell, let's say this is our app, right? Let's say there's a cell here that has Hamby's name over here. Let's say it's scrolled up and a new cell appeared at the bottom. It would use the same layout, meaning it would use this cell that is this height and this width with a label inside, and it would write someone else's name. Let's say Kate's, for instance, because that would be the next one on the list. So instead of creating a completely new a new cell, it takes the existing cell and repurposes it. So that is what table view DQ reusable cell with identifier does. Where the identifier is cell ID, because that is what we registered. That's the ID that we've given.
If you remember, we gave you a table view cells a random color, and if we scrolled up too much, it went off screen, and when it came back, it had a new random background color because this method got executed again.
Okay. It's complaining now because I need to typecast it. Right?
Yeah, force it.
Force it. Alright, done. Perfect. So what this does is TableView.DQ reusable self identifier says, hey, get me a cell, but it doesn't say what kind of cell. The default is UI table view cell, but you'll have to tell the table view that's what you're using. You're not using, Luke's custom cell or Chris's awesome cell. You're using UI table view cell. So then the next thing I want to do is I want to set its the label. So the way I do that is the default cell, the default UI table view cell has a text label on it. The text label is a UI label. And I know because it's a UI label that the UI label has a text property. So I can call cell.textlabel.text. And I can set it equal to, using subscripting on the array and the index of the array. So does anyone know the best, how I get the value that I want for that cell? Let's say, remember, I have an array of, I'll call on you in a second, Chase, so I just want to explain it. I have an array of data, and then a table view is a visual representation of an array. So how do I actually pull out that data? Use what? Count counts the total number of cells. It's index path. So what's an index path again? Does anyone recall? The index path, yes, it's a section of rows. So in this case, what's going to, this is the section and this is the row. So let's say our first section has 3 rows, and then our next section has 2 rows. So it starts at 0. It starts at 0 for a section, then we enumerate the rows from 0 to 2. That's the first 3 rows. Then we go to the next section, we enumerate the rows from 0 to 1, which is 2 rows. Because we had stated, because we did not override the number of sections method, it defaults to 1. So there's 1 section. That section is section 0. So the number of rows in section 0 that we want to display is going to be equal to the number of it will be equal to the number of rows in the index path. The index path tells you what section you're on inside the view and what row to display. So I'm just going to do it like this. You just say index path.row. It just says, hey, if you're on, I've just told you I told you a moment ago here that I want array.count cells. Let's say it's 10. That means it's going to go section 0, rows, and this will be row 0. So it'll pull out the 0th piece of data for that section. So now when I run this, I think it should work unless I forgot something. Okay, so what we do is we type in a name. So I'm going to type in Roy's name. Roy. I'm going to push return.
These are the data.
Yeah. So it didn't do anything. Why? Because I didn't reload data. I didn't reload the data. So whenever you want to update the view or update the contents inside of the table view to force it, you need to reload data. So I'm going to reload data in our text field should return method. Why? Because when the text field should return returns, the value, the number of data in the array gets updated. Because it gets updated, I know I already have the data stored somewhere because the table view depends on the array, that values exist in the array. So what I can do now is say, hey, update the table, and that is done by calling reload data on the array, on the table view. So reload data will say, hey, how many rows do I have? How many rows should I make? And it will check, well, array now has 3 values, so make 3 rows. And what should I put in it? Well, in the 0th row, put the 0th value of the array. In the first row, put the first value of the array. So I'm going to, again, I'm going to write Roy's name. Return Roy's name appears in the first row, or the 0th row. Now I'm going to type in, what's it called, Kevin's name. Cool. Do it again, type in Dan's name, and so on and so forth. This is part 1 of the project. It's very similar to what you'll do in part 2. Yes, sir. Okay, so it's 9:30. You are welcome to leave. I'm going to stay back for those of you who want me to continue going over this until you completely understand it, if you have time. If not, Roy, do you mind sending that video around that you took? You took a video, right?
Yeah.
Can you send it around through Slack?
Yeah, I do that.
Awesome. So Roy has a video, so assuming it's not egregiously big, it will fit through Slack or Dropbox.
Are we finished?
We are finished unless anyone wants to stay back. And I'm more than happy to go over the rest. Again,
Also, guys, office hours. For me, it's probably going to be, I don't know yet. I'll update Slack. We've seen some crazy shit in the past 2 weeks. So please, please, please use office hours if it's necessary for you. It's so useful to spend like an hour and a half in person. Thank you.
When is it?